Welcome to Digging Deeper Moments, a ministry of Eagles Nest Church. Our hope is that a few minutes from our studies will lead to a better Bible study for you. I want to talk to you about an episode recorded in 2 Kings 13. Let me start with some background information. This passage tells us of what happened between King Jehoash, king of Israel, and the prophet Elisha. The nation of Israel was separated after the reign of Solomon into two kingdoms, Judah, known as the southern kingdom, and Israel, known as the northern kingdom. Historically, the kingdom of Judah had a mixture of good kings who followed God and bad kings who didn't. They served idols instead. Not so with the kingdom of Israel. They didn't have any kings that the Bible records as following God. None. But once in a while it tells of a king whose heart might be open to hear, even if they hadn't been following God. And that's where this starts. Jehoash was one of those kings, a king of Israel, who the Bible records as doing evil, like all the kings of Israel before him, who goes to see Elisha, who's been serving as a powerful prophet for years and is now near death. At this point in Jehoash's reign, Israel had been suffering from attacks from the Arameans, or Syrians, that had been decimating their forces. Jehoash, knowing that Elisha was dying, went to see him to hear the word of the Lord. After all, it had been divine intervention through God's prophets that had kept Israel safe from being overrun by the Arameans already. In 1 Kings chapter 20, God miraculously delivered Israel from Ben-Hadad, the Aramean king, who along with 32 other kings had besieged Samaria, Israel's capital city. And in 2 Kings chapter 6, God delivered them again. In that instance, God kept telling Elisha where the Arameans were setting up camp, and Elisha would then tell the king of Israel, so he always knew ahead of time where the Arameans would be. It happened so often that the king of Aram thought he had a spy working against him. But one of his officers told him that Elisha the prophet who's in Israel tells the king of Israel the very words you speak in your bedroom. So then the king of Aram sent a strong force of men to capture Elisha. They surrounded the city where Elisha was, but Elisha prayed that they would be struck blind, which God did. And then Elisha led them to Samaria, where the king of Israel captured them. Now, Jehoash obviously knew of all this recent history, knew of God's miraculous intervention. So let's read about the interaction between him and Elisha from 2 Kings chapter 13. This is verses 15 through 17. It says, Elisha said, talking to King Jehoash, "Get a bow and some arrows," and he did so. "Take the bow in your hands," he said to the king of Israel. When he had taken it, Elisha put his hands on the king's hands. "Open the east window," he said, and he opened it. "Shoot," Elisha said, and he shot. "The Lord's arrow of victory, the arrow of victory over Aram," Elisha declared. "You will completely destroy the Arameans at Aphek." So up to this point, Jehoash has done exactly what Elisha said. And these actions had some symbolic significance. Elisha told Jehoash to shoot from the east window. In biblical context, the east often symbolizes new beginnings and hope. And Elisha called the arrow the Lord's arrow of victory, signifying the complete defeat of the Arameans at Aphek. This one arrow signified victory in one battle, and Elisha calling it the Lord's arrow was recognition that, as in the past, it would be because of the Lord's intervention. It wouldn't be because of Israel's strength. Their strength had been significantly weakened by the ongoing battles. I would think by this point, Jehoash should have recognized the lessons Elisha was trying to teach him and the spiritual significance attached to them. The culture related to warfare in that part of the world at that time saw shooting arrows and striking arrows as a depiction of future battles. So the amount of time someone struck the arrows, it was thought, could foretell the number of victories God would have for them. Now let's read on in verses 18 and 19. Then he said, again Elisha, "Take the arrows," and the king took them. Elisha told him, "Strike the ground." He struck it 3 times and stopped. The man of God was angry with him and said, "You should have struck the ground 5 or 6 times. Then you would have defeated Aram and completely destroyed it. But now you were defeated only 3 times. So here we see that Jehoash is still doing what Elisha asked of him, but because of Elisha's reaction, his anger, it's apparent that there was something missing in his obedience. Jehoash should have learned from Elisha's reaction to his shooting the arrow that there was a spiritual element involved also in the striking of the arrows. Elisha was trying to encourage him to act decisively and offensively with confidence in God's power, but he didn't obey with a fullness, a completeness. He really didn't respond with a passion that could be seen as a declaration of his belief that God would work mightily on his behalf. And for Elisha, who probably knew that this would be the last time he would be able to influence what happened in Israel because of his impending death, Jehoash's tepid obedience was a great disappointment because Elisha knew it meant that Israel wouldn't see complete deliverance from their oppressor. Elisha had no doubts about the limitless power of God to deliver Israel, as he'd seen it happen over and over. But because Jehoash only complied minimally, Elisha saw that Israel's deliverance would only be partial. Jehoash showed a hesitant, half-hearted, limited faith, and that didn't bode well for Israel. He stopped short, and that caused him and his people to miss out on the fullness of God's desired blessings for them. So what are some things we can learn from this story in Scripture? One thing that I notice is that the outcome of Israel's war was impacted by how Jehoash responded. God's power is absolute, and he can do what he wills, but for some reason, he chooses to work through our human faith responses. He has ordained that our faith plays an important part in how things ultimately play out. Another thing is that partial obedience or a half-hearted obedience can limit the blessings that come our way. The implication from Elisha is that God wanted to do more, but Jehoash's actions limited that. Proverbs 3:5 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart." A wholehearted trust is what Elisha wanted to see. Instead, Jehoash stopped short in his faith and obedience, and he and his people missed out on the fullness of the blessing God desired for them. Jehoash was being tested, and when we're being tested, how we respond reveals our heart, our attitude toward God and his place in our lives. Sometimes we can find ourselves uninspired, hesitant, weary when looking at the things God's asking of us. Sometimes we might not have the faith that he'll come through for us or that we deserve him to come through for us. But that's when it's most important to persevere, to be persistent, to trust in him fully, in both his power and his desire to come through on our behalf. That's when we should zealously seek his guidance through prayer and applying Scripture, through wise counsel from other trusted believers. That's when we should press in rather than give up, because God will reward our persistence in seeking him out. Hebrews 11:6 says, "But without faith it is impossible to please him, for he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him." And Hebrews 10:39 says, "But we do not belong to those who shrink back and are destroyed, but to those who have faith and are saved." He wants our diligence as we seek him and serve him. And he wants us to continue to press on, even in, or especially in, difficult times. Galatians 6:9 says, "Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." So let's not give up. Let's not stop short. My hope is that this passage would serve as a reminder to us of the importance of faith and full obedience and perseverance and passion in our walk with God. Remember that Ephesians 3 says that our God is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all we ask or think. So let's respond to him with confidence and boldness and passion as we walk out our lives, knowing that he is with us and he is for us. If you're ever facing a situation where it feels like God is your only hope, that if he doesn't show up, you don't know how you'll make it, don't be like Jehoash. Strike those arrows on the ground until he brings victory. We never know what impact we might be making for ourselves and for the kingdom. Don't shrink back. God bless you.